But I think we have to understand the Russians have won this war. And if you're going to tell the Russians, no, you have to go back to square one, we're not going to do business with you, the Russians will cross the river and move west. I suspect they'll move to Odessa and they'll move into Kiev. And now at that point, they'll probably stop and there'll be a resumption of movement further west until, if necessary, they've gone all that distance in order to guarantee there is no threat to them inside Ukraine. That's not what they want to do. That's what they will do. We need to understand that. And saying that they can't do that or they're not strong enough, that's a lot of nonsense. Hopefully, we've learned by now, Dan, Russia is quite capable of doing what it says. And what we need to keep in mind is that without us, the Europeans can do nothing. They don't have the command and control structure. They don't have the space-based intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets. They cannot move their forces into Western Ukraine and present any formidable obstacle to Russian military power without us.
I don't think they could do it with us either, though, on the ground.
Well, that may be true, but from our standpoint, that's an easy solution.
Yeah.
You tell London and Paris, if you're that stupid and this is what you want to do, bear in mind, we're not going. And you get us out of Ukraine. And at the end of the day, the Russians who live there, the Russians who own the terrain, the Russians who have historically dominated that part of the world for hundreds of years, are going to do so in the future. We need to come to terms with that. That's not a bad thing necessarily for us by any means. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing for Europeans if what remains of Ukraine when the war is over is neutral. And
right.
that has to be driven across again. And I think President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov will continue to be polite and do what they can to accommodate President Trump, because I think they know that he's sincere and wants to end this conflict. But I also think they are not convinced that he can do that, because of all the other actors on the stage right now in the West, here in Washington, as well as in Western Europe. And so I think the Russians will press forward and secure their objectives in this war: the denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine, and the neutralization of the future state. They will do whatever is necessary to achieve those outcomes. If that means crossing the Dnieper and going down to Odessa, they'll do that. Keep in mind that their concern about the Black Sea is very obvious. The Ukrainians were told that they could export grain, and that was fine. But then they tried to use the ships that exported grain when they came back to carry weapons, and that was unacceptable. So the Russians have been down this road before. And again, I think they want to accommodate President Trump because they, under no circumstances, want to go to war with us at all. No one does. There's no reason for any war in that region of the world at all. And they know that. We know that, I think. I think President Trump certainly does. But they're going to be skeptical. And so while they will listen and they will be polite and they will try to accommodate us, they will still press ahead and do what they think is necessary on the ground to secure their interests.
Analysis. This segment is the intellectual core of Macgregor's argument, weaving historical context, military assessment, and policy prescription into a cohesive narrative. His emphasis on normalizing U.S. Russia relations reflects a realist approach, prioritizing superpower détente over regional proxy wars, consistent with Trump's stated foreign policy leanings. The claim of a CIA, MI6 conspiracy to destabilize Russia is a bold historical assertion, echoing critiques of post-Cold War expansionism, e.g., NATO enlargement, but it lacks substantiation here beyond illusion, requiring viewers to accept it on faith or prior knowledge. Macgregor's declaration of Russian victory, likened to World War II mop-up operations, is a military judgment likely based on territorial gains, e.g., Donbass, Crimea, and Ukraine's reported exhaustion by early 2025, though he doesn't define winning beyond implying inevitability. The Austrian State Treaty analogy is a standout proposal, offering a historical blueprint for neutrality that could appeal to diplomats seeking a framework. However, its feasibility in Ukraine, fractured by war, ethnic tensions, and Russian occupation, isn't explored, leaving a gap between theory and application. Lavrov's conditions provide concrete evidence of Russia's stance, and the grain weapons anecdote adds credibility to their distrust. The Ukraine's counternarrative, e.g., survival-driven tactics, is absent. Macgregor's casualty figures are striking, 1.2 million Ukrainian and 100,000 Russian deaths, but unsourced in the transcript, raising questions about accuracy or exaggeration, especially given the war's opacity. His policy recommendation, cut aid, withdraw, and let Zelensky fall, is starkly pragmatic, assuming a domino effect, regime collapse, Russian satisfaction, and peace. This sidesteps logistical hurdles, e.g., how to extract personnel safely, and geopolitical fallout, e.g., NATO's credibility, refugee flows. The critique of Europe's dependence is a strong point, rooted in NATO's reliance on U.S. satellites and command structures, though it underestimates political will in capitals facing Russian threats. Macgregor's moral framing, ending a war fueled by corrupt elites, could sway viewers weary of foreign spending, but it paints a binary picture that excludes Ukraine's agency or Europe's security stakes. The segment's depth lies in its clarity, yet its one-sidedness limits its persuasiveness to those already skeptical of intervention. Takeaway: Macgregor's call to end U.S. aid and withdraw from Ukraine presents a radical but potentially decisive way to halt the conflict, leveraging America's outsized role to force an outcome. Russia's objectives, neutrality, demilitarization, could be met, and the bloodshed, if his figures hold, stanched. Yet, this gamble risks a power vacuum, European instability, and an emboldened Russia, as the U.S. would cede influence without guaranteeing peace. The Austrian model offers a diplomatic carrot, but its success depends on trust and cooperation absent in the current stalemate. For Trump, this suggests a high-stakes choice: prioritize American disengagement and Russian ties over Allied unity, betting that Europe's weakness and Ukraine's collapse reshape the region favorably, or chaotically. Summary: in this middle segment, Macgregor outlines his strategic vision for U.S. policy while dissecting Russia's objectives and Europe's role. He begins by asserting that Trump's primary goal is normalizing relations with Russia, a priority he claims was undermined in Trump's first term by a small cadre within U.S. intelligence, CIA, and British MI6, who cultivated the Ukraine conflict to destabilize Russia post-Cold War. Macgregor insists Russia has effectively won the war, with Ukraine reduced to a mop-up phase, and seeks a neutral, demilitarized state, possibly modeled on the 1955 Austrian State Treaty. He details Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov's conditions from the recent talks, agreeing not to target energy infrastructure and resuming a Black Sea initiative in a more acceptable form, but notes Russia's refusal to trust Ukraine's word, citing past abuses like smuggling weapons under grain export ships. Macgregor argues the U.S. holds the key to ending the war by cutting all military and financial aid to Ukraine and withdrawing American personnel, predicting this would collapse Zelensky's regime, force his exit, and pave the way for a neutral government under international supervision, e.g., OSCE elections. He accuses pro-war factions in Washington, Paris, London, and Berlin of prolonging the conflict, claiming Europe lacks the command, control, and intelligence assets to act without U.S. support. Macgregor cites staggering casualties, 1.2 million Ukrainian and 100,000 Russian deaths, as a moral imperative to stop the bloodshed, urging Trump to override these corrupt voices and focus on American interests, which he says reject war over Ukraine.